Everyone, feel free to continue to use the chat throughout the presentation. This webinar series is being brought to you by the American Association of Family and Consumer Sciences. We are proud to be the only professional association dedicated to family and consumer sciences students and professionals who represent multiple practice settings and content areas and are committed to positively impacting the lives of individuals, families, and communities. We are excited that you've joined us today. I am pleased at this time to introduce our presenters. Beth McCalister has more than a decade's worth of experience monitoring, selecting, and summarizing international consumer products regulations, compiling customized products to address strategic business needs for retailers and manufacturers, including entering into geographic markets, facilitating education and training throughout the supply chain, and developing global best practices around regulatory compliance. She is constantly developing her subject matter expertise in extended producer responsibility, in addition to several types of consumer products. And Kim Plassche is a senior regulatory consultant on the global market access team at Compliance and Risks, where she researches and monitors international product safety legislation for custom client reports. Kim is a librarian by training with 18 years of experience and a master's of library science from the University of New York, Buffalo, New York. Prior to taking on her CNR role, she served as MAP librarian at her alma mater. Kim has also worked in public and private libraries, including at a consumer products testing company where she researched regulations and standards for internal and external clients. Thank you, Beth and Kim, for sharing your expertise with us today. I'm going to hand the floor over to our presenters to take us through our session today.
Thank you so much, Karen and Lori, for inviting us today. Let's see if I can manage to share screen. Let's see. So first, you will see this wonderful background that Microsoft so thoughtfully found for me. All right, good so far. So thank you again for the introduction. I'm happy to see so many people attending today. I didn't put my location in the chat, but I am in Lewiston, New York, which is near Buffalo. Beth and I are presenting today to kind of give you an overview of what we consider when we are doing our job here at Compliance and Risks. What we do at Compliance and Risks is help clients enter new markets or continue working in existing markets to meet regulatory requirements for a wide range of products. Today, we will be talking specifically about textiles, which, includes things like apparel, footwear, and so on. So the way I'm going to frame this is what Beth and I would consider when we receive a question from a client or we begin research on a project where we don't know anything about the requirements. So kind of do it in a rundown order of things that we think might be most likely regulated in a country. So firstly, we consider what textile products, what they actually encompass when we are researching a request for information. Typically, a client would specify, hopefully, the type of product that they are hoping to sell. But textile product regulations really include a number of different products. So we can see regulations for the products listed here on the screen. And they range from things like apparel, specifically sleepwear is highly regulated, and can go all the way through footwear to home textiles and even tents. Anything that has a fabric or textile component can be included in these laws. The first thing we consider when we are researching any project or product is general product labeling. When we start research, we are just like starting off, what would any product be required to have? They typically do apply to all or most products sold in a country. These types of requirements can be found in overarching laws relating to trade, product safety, or even just be titled something about commodity labeling. In most countries, general product labeling typically includes what we have on the screen here as is appropriate for the product being sold. These laws do cover requirements for what needs to be disclosed on a label, as well as how it should appear, including placement and durability. This would also include the language or languages that the information should be included in. So, for example, if a country's official language is Spanish, their law may state that the labeling should be given in Spanish. And sometimes laws may also specify that other languages are allowed, but it has to be less prominent than the official language. Of course, this does vary. Regarding textile products, the following textile products are generally subject to general product labeling. So it would be anything in packages like apparel and sleepwear, footwear, accessories like belts, gloves, and handbags, and household textiles. Country of origin is something that we see required frequently globally on labels. But surprisingly, the European Union, the EU, does not require country of origin, and many of the member countries also don't. But in the United States, textile, fur, and wool products do need to be labeled to show country of origin, and the requirement gets very specific. So imported products must show where they were manufactured when they are then imported into the US. Products that are made entirely in the US of materials that were also made in the US are allowed to be labeled with the Made in USA label or an equivalent phrase. However, if the product is made in the US but includes imported materials, then it must be labeled to state that. This is something that we see in the news. Different companies are dinged for that they are label their products made in the USA, and it is found that that isn't the case, or it includes imported materials. Care instructions are something that we see are required often in many countries. And they are important even if they aren't required to include them. This is because consumers look at care instructions, I know I do, when they are shopping for clothes. So for my personal experience, I am a working mother. I have many pets that I have to take care of and kids. I don't have time to do loads of laundry based on if they can be washed in hot or if they should be with similar colors or not. So I do look at care instructions when I'm shopping for clothes. In the United States, it is required. Manufacturers do have to give instructions about regular care for the garment and stipulate that if those instructions are followed, that there will be no harm done to the product. But it is surprising to note that Canada and most EU member states actually do not require care labeling. Fiber identity and content labeling is another requirement that we see to be fairly common across the world. In most countries, apparel and home textiles do have to have these disclosures. Typically, it will be given how you would see ingredients for a food product usually. So it will appear in the according to the highest percentage and down. So in the example here, we have 45% acrylic, 30% wool, 25% nylon. These laws do either call out names of fibers that they wish you to use, or you would use a generic fiber name. Many of these laws have exemptions for things like trimmings, ornamentation, and linings, so look out for that. Going a little further with content labeling, fur and faux fur is something to consider when shipping to other countries. Here in the US, we actually have one of the more stringent requirements for labeling of fur and faux fur. So this is regulated federally. So so at the national level, and garments made either entirely or partly with fur must include the animal name that it came from using the guide that the rules contains, the name or registered number of the manufacturer, importer, seller, marketer, or distributor, the country of origin for the imported fur specifically, details about anything that has been done to the fur, so if it's been colored or dyed. And this one is icky to know about, but if the fur product is composed wholly or substantially of pieces like paws, tails, and so on, it does have to be labeled to state that, as well as if any part of the garment or product has textile or wool, that content still has to be labeled as well. Taking it a little bit further, there are requirements or specifically restrictions on the use of dog and cat fur. So sorry, I went a little bit out of order here. Sorry, I was excited because these are my pets. These are Frankie and Arlene, so I was excited and skipped ahead. But so California, Delaware, and New York, they actually are states that have enacted laws prohibiting the use of cat and dog fur in any consumer products. And there are similar laws in the EU and other places as well. But so this kind of brings up a point that I will be making more often in the presentation here, that there are state rules in addition to those federal rules that we've already touched on. New York State, in addition to that dog and cat fur prohibition, they also add a few extra labeling requirements for fur in general. And this is specifically aimed at making sure that consumers are not deceived and think they are buying a fur product when they are not. And then finally, we have leather and faux leather disclosure requirements. In the United States, the Federal Trade Commission has published their leather guides to help consumers understand, it looks like leather, is it really? So this again is really about deceptive practices and aims to prevent consumers from being consumers from purchasing something that they think is leather based on the kind, grade, quality, so on, and it in fact is not. So the US requires leather and faux leather disclosures to appear either as a stamp on the product or on a tag, label, or card attached to the product with the stamp here. This should stay on the product long enough that the label is still there when it is received by the consumer. And any disclosures related to leather and faux leather should also appear in advertising of the products, including online. Other countries require leather disclosures, including Austria, France, Mexico, and Spain. There are additional requirements for footwear labeling that may not be in general textile laws. So specifically in the European Union, there is a footwear labeling law that requires information about the content of the upper, the lining and sock, and the outer sole, which are seen here in this picture, to be labeled specifically. But this information can be given in pictograms or in writing. Other countries that require these types of disclosures include Brazil, Israel, South Korea, Taiwan, and Vietnam. I mentioned that there are special considerations for products intended for children, and China is one country that attempts to place extra restrictions on these products. So they have a mandatory standard, GB 31701, and they specifically require different safety and labeling procedures for products that are for infants 0 to 36 months and then children 3 to 14 years. And these are very detailed, and so that they require manufacturers to include in the instructions the standard number that the product was tested to. Moving away from labeling now, I'm going to talk about chemicals, which is another big issue when it comes to textile products. In the European Union, there is a large overarching chemical law called REACH commonly, which stands for Registration, Evaluation, Authorization, and Restriction of Chemicals. It includes many different chemicals for products products and processes, far more than textiles. There is an Annex 17 where they break it down which substance is restricted in which product. So I'm just going to touch on a few of the chemicals that we see restricted in textiles per REACH. So the first are nonylphenol ethoxylates, NPE. This restriction came into effect in 2021. So the way these work is it will say what product or part of product a concentration of the substance cannot exceed by weight. For azo dyes, another chemical that is restricted per Annex 17, they are actually concerned about the release of 22 aromatic amines in detectable concentrations. And this is from textiles and leather articles that come into prolonged contact with the skin or oral cavity. Azo dyes or azo colorants are regulated also in other jurisdictions as are NPE. Interestingly, in India, this is the main substance that is restricted in textiles. They prohibit azo colorants there as well. We also see polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons restricted per EU REACH. But this is specifically for rubber or plastic components of a textile product that come into contact with the human skin or the oral cavity, with a limit of 1 parts per million for any of those listed on the screen. So when it's apparel, we're thinking about maybe gloves or sportswear, the straps, bands, anything that would be made of rubber or plastic. For also in the European Union, we have we see them restricting CMR substances, which stands for carcinogenic, mutagenic, or toxic for reproduction. There are 33 of these specifically regulated. They set, again, maximum concentration limits. These include things like benzene, cadmium, arsenic, lead, formaldehyde. These are chemicals that we see. Phthalates, we see them regulated across the industry and globe. But there are exemptions within the regulations for things like non-textile fasteners or medical devices that have a textile component, or PPE, personal protective equipment. Other countries that limit formaldehyde specifically include Japan, China, Netherlands, Finland, Germany, Norway, Thailand, and South Korea. So in Japan, they set a limit of 75 parts per million for all textile products, except for those for babies under 24 months. China has a mandatory standard GB 18401, which sets the parts per million limit according to the age of the intended user and according to the skin contact. Netherlands, they have a regulation specifically on formaldehyde for textiles that come into contact with the skin. For lead, in addition to the EU that we saw, the US Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act here in the States set the limit for lead as 90 parts per million in surface coatings and 100 parts per million in substrates. However, it is interesting to note that the CPSC has exempted textiles from testing under this requirement, since they are manufactured using processes that would not result in a byproduct exceeding the lead limits. or I'm sorry, an end product exceeding those limits. So PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, this is something that is very big right now. If you're not familiar with what these substances are, they were introduced in the 1940s in manufacturing. They're pretty much everywhere. Where we see them commonly used would be in stain and water resistant fabrics, so a raincoat, as well as stain resistant carpeting, cleaning products, paints, firefighting foams. They're used in a lot of products, and they stick around for a while, and we are now just learning of how hazardous they actually are. So Norway was the first country to ban one of these types of substances, PFOA, in 2014, or I'm sorry, well, they limited it. And then in the United States, there are several states that have regulated PFAS, even more than I have on the screen here. These are just kind of the first ones that came out. There are a lot of issues surrounding PFAS regulation. So you can see here we have states that are trying to grapple with this issue. And what they're doing is they tend to piecemeal out the bans or the limits. So they do it by product over time, when really there a complete ban would probably be easier for our jobs, at least, to keep track of here, as we're tracking the legislation. But there are issues beyond just having them in the textiles. Last legislative session in the states, I saw a lot of different states are trying to figure out how they can support people that have already been affected by PFAS. So bills being considered include things like taking over farmland, agricultural spaces that have been contaminated by these substances, or how to help firefighters that maybe came into contact or worked with these substances, and or how to support the fire departments even. So this is an interesting thing to watch. Oh, and one more thing about PFAS is there is no commonly accepted list of substances that are actually PFAS. So at the federal level now in the United States and also in the EU, what they're really trying to do is come to agreement on what chemicals would be included for any legislation pertaining to PFAS. We also have in the United States chemicals of concern laws, specifically for children. Children are still growing, still developing, so we of course want to protect them and limit their exposure to substances even more than we would for adults. So I've listed here some states, Minnesota, Maine, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington state. What these laws do is they continuously determine priority chemicals or chemicals of concern that they would like to be aware of. And then they require manufacturers and distributors to report to them when they have found products, or if they are putting on the market products that contain these chemicals. So moving away from chemical restrictions, finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about other safety issues. The first one is flammability. In the United States, the Flammable Fabrics Act regulates the manufacture of highly flammable clothing. And under the act, the CPSC can issue mandatory flammability standards for products. So far, we've seen them established for clothing, textiles, vinyl plastic film, carpeting, children's sleepwear, specifically mattresses, and upholstered furniture. In Canada, they have their textile flammability regulations that apply to textile products. And what their regulations do is set a standard for the flame spread time under testing according to their standard CGSB 4.2 number 27.5. So the flame spread time varies according to the type of fiber surface, whether it's raised or not, and the product type, but products do have to meet that testing requirement. Other countries with flammability requirements include Austria, Ireland, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the UK. We also see issues with cords and drawstrings that regulations attempt to minimize. So we actually see them beyond clothing. They also pop up in window coverings, so to prevent strangulation. But for children's clothing specifically in the European Union, there is a mandatory standard, EN 14682, which pertains to children's clothing. So the goal is to, in the picture here, you could see we would want to limit the length of any cords or eliminate them entirely. Other countries that do restrict drawstrings include Australia, Canada, China, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, and the United States. So that's all for me, a crash course. I'm happy to hear your questions at the end, but I'm going to pass it off now to Beth, who is going to talk about some of the big issues that we see coming up.
Thank you, Kim. That was a great job you did pronouncing some of those chemicals. Okay, so we're moving on to textile sustainability and extended producer responsibility, or EPR, which are very hot topics in the consumer products industry right now. Several clients, both existing and potential, have been inquiring about these types of laws more and more frequently. And I'm going to delve into specific requirements, some of which have been around for a while, but also some have been recently published. And in addition, there are some proposals that I'll mention, and they are most likely going to come into fruition. So we'll begin with the European Union, which in 2008 published the Waste Framework Directive. This directive excludes several types of waste, including animal byproducts, with the exception of those intended to be incinerated, sent to landfills, or used in biogas or composting plants. These may or may not be included in textiles products, so they might be relevant to producers or not. The bottom line for this directive is that it requires all member states to set up separate collection for textiles by January 1st, 2025. And the European Commission is actually looking to revise this directive, having held an online consultation and call for evidence, which ended in April of last year. The objectives of the revision are to limit waste generation, increase reuse, and increase cost-efficient preparation for reuse, as well as quality recycling, including for waste textiles. And moving on to Commission Regulation 2023/2055, restricting synthetic polymer microparticles on their own or intentionally added to mixtures. This is otherwise and more easily known as the microplastics restriction. So first, I'll give you a little bit of a general overview of this one. You may be thinking, so this amends Annex 17, which Kim mentioned earlier, of the EU REACH regulation. What does it have to do with sustainability? So you'd be correct, but it also goes hand in hand with the EU's sustainability efforts regarding microplastics and more specifically glitter. So according to REACH, plastic glitter is considered a mixture. And because of that, it is included in the scope of this restriction. It does not completely ban glitter though. Certain characteristics of the glitter determine its applicability to the restriction. So first off, only glitter composed of insoluble, non-biodegradable plastic is included. If it's water soluble, biodegradable, natural, or even made from another inorganic material like glass or metal, it is not part of the ban, as none of these can be defined as microplastics. Second, only the sale of insoluble, non-biodegradable plastic glitter that is meant for uses without a transitional period is affected by the ban that went into effect on the 17th of October of this year. Paragraph 6 of the regulation lays out transitional periods for other products, such as cosmetics, detergents, and so on, which the ban will affect in the future. And lastly, the sale of loose plastic glitter meant for uses without a transitional period, or glitter that is affixed to decorative objects and that can be expected to come off during normal use, is also part of the current ban. However, there are always exceptions. Glitter that is contained within another substance or solid, such as glitter paint, glue, or glitter that's confined to the inside of a piece of jewelry, for example, is not affected by the ban and may continue to be sold even if it is insoluble and non-biodegradable. So as of October 17th, 2023, per the regulation, there's been a prohibition on the sale of microplastics. Again, this includes plastic glitter on their own or intentionally added to products intended for uses where there is no transition period. So this is where textile products come into play, as they are among this first group of products. This is also where things become even more complicated. So articles are out of scope. So the function of glitter on an article must be determined in order to decide if the ban is applicable. So Chapter 2.3 of the European Chemical Agency's Guidance on Requirements for Substances in Articles helps one make this determination. There's even a flow chart that illustrates the process. And per the guidance, the decorative function of the article containing glitter determines whether it is in scope of the regulation. So where the decorative function of the article containing glitter is secondary, glitter is always considered essential and therefore out of scope. On the other hand, when glittered articles serve purely or primarily a decorative function and the glitter can detach from the article under normal use, the glitter is in scope and can no longer be sold, which means the article can no longer be sold. However, the glitter will be regarded as an integral part of the article if it does not come off during normal use or storage. In this case, the glitter and therefore the article are exempt. To hopefully clear things up and help with the implementation of this microplastics restriction, the European Commission is expecting to publish a Q&A by the end of this year. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so the next two decisions are voluntary, meaning companies are not required to display the EU eco-label on their textile or footwear products. However, if they do choose to do so, said products must comply with the requirements set out in the respective decision. According to the decision establishing the ecological criteria for the award of the EU eco-label for textile products, the term textile products means textile clothing and accessories or interior textile products consisting of at least 80% by weight of textile fibers in the woven, non-woven, or knitted form. Textile fibers, yarn, fabric, and knitted panels, which are intermediate products intended for use in textile clothing and accessories, as well as interior textiles. These include upholstery fabric and mattress ticking prior to the application of backings and treatments associated with the final product. Non-fiber elements are also intermediate products that are incorporated into textile clothing and accessories, as well as interior textiles. And these can include zippers, buttons, other accessories, and also membranes, coatings, and laminates. And finally, cleaning products, which are woven or non-woven, made from textile fibers and intended for wet or dry cleaning of surfaces and the drying of kitchenware. The following are not included in the scope for the product group textile products. These are single-use products, floor coverings, fabrics that are part of outdoor use structures, and garments, fabrics, and fibers that contain electrical devices or form an integral part of electrical circuitry, or devices or impregnated substances designed to sense or react changes in ambient conditions. And decision 2016/1349 establishing the ecological criteria for the award of the EU Ecolabel for footwear. The scope for this decision includes all articles designed to protect or cover the foot with applied sole which comes into contact with the ground. Also included in the scope are footwear covered by Annex 2 of Directive 94/11/EC, as well as protective footwear that's covered by Council Directive 89/686/EEC. Now, per the decision, footwear shall not comprise the following: footwear that contains an electronic or electric component, single-use footwear, socks that have an applied sole, or toy footwear. So in a nutshell, what these two decisions do is lay out criteria for textile and footwear products to meet high environmental standards throughout their entire life cycle. And finally, you should keep an eye out for an EU textile EPR directive, where textile producers will be responsible for the costs associated with managing textiles product waste. So that's up and coming, but hasn't been published yet. Okay, and on to the next slide, please. Okay, so we're moving on to France, where law number 2020-105 relating to the fight against waste and the circular economy, or EDGEC, was enacted. This is the big one with the Tri-Man logo and sorting information requirements. So this law promotes the general reduction of waste and the circular economy and sets out the legal framework for France to move from a linear economy to a more circular model. And they're aiming to eliminate waste and reuse existing resources as much as possible. In particular, the law introduced Article L541-9-3 to the French Environmental Code. And that states that from the 1st of January 2022, the Tri-Man logo, along with sorting information, is mandatory for all household products that are subject to EPR requirements in France, including textiles and footwear. So sorting information consists of information that specifies the sorting methods or deposit of waste resulting from the product. This information should appear on the product or its packaging. But if the aforementioned is not possible, it should be provided in other documents like manuals, instructions, or so on that come with the product. And per Refashion, which is the French eco-organization in charge of EPR for clothing, household linens, and footwear, since February 1st, 2023 at the latest, or August 1st, 2023 for products manufactured or imported before February 1st of this year. The Tri-Man logo and sorting information must be affixed on all clothing, home textiles, and footwear items. Okay, and next slide, please. So moving on, but still in France. On the 29th of April, 2022, and under AJAC, France enacted Decree number 2022-748 relating to consumer information on the environmental qualities and characteristics of waste generating products. This decree requires labeling showing the environmental characteristics of covered products, which are packaging, textiles, footwear, and sports and leisure items. Regarding textiles specifically, products must provide the amount of recycled materials included, the name of each hazardous substance, mixture, or article per reach that is present in a concentration greater than 0.1% by mass percentage. Traceability information for consumers concerning woven, dyed, printed, or manufactured textiles. Consumer information on plastic microfibers and textiles when the proportion is greater than 50%, and the recyclability of the product per the decree's 5 criteria. Now, in cases where endocrine disrupting chemicals are confirmed or suspected to be contained in articles, a statement must be provided to customers no later than 6 months after the identification of these chemicals as being dangerous. Further, according to the decree, producers, importers, and marketers must follow a schedule to integrate these requirements. The largest companies, those reporting an annual turnover of greater than 50 million euro, and also placing at least 25,000 units on the market, have been liable since January 1st of this year. Companies with an annual revenue of greater than 20 million euro and which place at least 10,000 units on the market have until January 1st, 2024 to comply. And finally, those companies with an annual revenue of more than 10 million euro and at least 10,000 products on the market shall be compliant by January 1st, 2025. And last but not least, for France, we have the order of November 23rd, 2022, on the specifications of the eco-organizations and individual systems of the extended responsibility sector of producers of textiles, footwear, and household linen, also called TLC for short. Now, this order establishes requirements for the prevention, collection, sorting, treatment, repair, reuse, and recycling of new clothing, footwear, or household linen, again called abbreviated TLC, that is intended for private individuals, and new textile products for the home. Producers may opt to be part of an accredited producer responsibility organization, or PRO, or they could set up their own individual system to meet the EPR requirements of the order. Regarding labeling, a display that is visible or accessible to the consumer at the time of purchase must inform of any environmental impacts that the product has over its entire life cycle. This may include greenhouse gas emissions, damage to biodiversity, consumption of water and other natural resources, and waste, as well as the respect of social criteria of the product in question. Okay, and next slide, please. Sorry, my dogs are making a bunch of noise in the background. Okay, so on to the Netherlands. Their decree on EPR for textiles just came into effect this past July 1st. This one establishes that producers of apparel and household textiles are responsible for the recycling and preparation of reuse of textile products that they have placed on the Dutch market. Further, producers are required to finance and implement a system to collect, recycle, reuse, and properly dispose of waste from textiles that, again, they have brought to market. The decree sets, among others, targets for textile reuse and recycling from 50% in 2025 to 75% in 2030. Additionally, the producer must ensure measures are taken to incorporate the greatest amount possible of post-consumer recycled textile fibers in new textile products. And finally, by August 1st of each year, the producer must submit a report to the Minister of Infrastructure and Water Management, providing data on compliance, implementation of the intake system, and information obligations. Reports for this year, as well as 2024, will be sufficient, provided they show the quantity of textile products that they placed on the market. Now for up and coming legislation, and coming up in other jurisdictions, we'll start with the draft regulation on the management of footwear and textile waste in Bulgaria, which was published in July of last year. This draft regulation applies to textile and footwear waste and aims to increase the amount of recycled household waste while reducing how much household waste ends up in landfills by implementing the EU's directives 2018/850 and 2018/851. Compliance requirements for persons who place textiles and footwear on the market include registration with Bulgarian authorities, retaining books and reports of waste activities, submitting information annually by March 31st on the waste collected, utilized, or recycled, and submitting a report by April 15th of the current year showing factual findings of the previous year. Now, those placing textiles and footwear on the market would, again, be responsible for the separate collection, transportation, storage, preparation for reuse, recycling, utilization, and disposal of waste textiles and footwear. These objectives would be implemented annually and in increasing percentages. Now in Italy, there is a draft decree on obligations for manufacturers of textile products regarding the design, production, disposal, and recycling of textiles. Similar to other countries, textiles producers would be responsible for paying for and organizing the collection, preparation for reuse, recycling, and recovery of waste textiles. Management systems may be set up individually or via PROs. Again, that stands for Producer Responsibility Organizations. And a main objective of this draft decree is for producers to design textiles that are durable, reusable, easily repairable, contain recycled materials, and do not contain hazardous substances, including microplastics. And finally, we have a draft EPR legislation in Sweden. On May 4th, 2023, Sweden's government office published a memorandum containing a proposal to amend the Waste Ordinance, SFS 2020-614, in regard to the circular handling of textiles and textile waste. The proposal suggests that anyone who generates textile waste from textile apparel, bags, and accessories, home textiles, and interior textiles should be required to sort and store it separately from other waste. So in other words, the onus here is placed on the consumer to keep their textile waste separate from other waste. Per this proposal, municipalities will be responsible for the separate collection of municipal textile waste. In addition, this proposal suggests that municipalities should be responsible for designing their collection systems and providing information on the best ways to reuse textiles. Further regulations regarding the treatment and recycling of textile waste will be proposed after the adoption of relevant EU legislation. Now, if enacted, this proposed amendment is set to enter into force on January 1st, 2025. And next slide, please.
Tim and Beth, that was so great. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Very interesting for me. A lot of keywords pop up that I see in the news a lot lately, like microfibers, like PFAS, sustainability. I think there's a huge interest amongst consumers for products that are sustainable. I'm going to open it up to our attendees in case they have any questions. I have quite a few, but I want to prioritize their questions first. So if any attendees would like to raise their hand or unmute to ask a question, if you want to post it in the chat, I'm happy to read it. But looking forward to your different questions for Beth and Kim. All right, that means I get to jump forward first. Yes. Okay, so an interesting one that I hear about is the secondary market, and textiles are kind of like a unique product that ends up on the secondary market a lot. So you buy a cool t-shirt and maybe it's last season, not next season. And so you're going to bring it to a swap meet and you're going to maybe donate it to a welfare store, but in some way it's going to make it to a second person. And if you're like me, the tag is really, really annoying. So you've yanked off the tag and there's no tag. Are there any rules in place? Are countries thinking about rules for the secondary market? Like, or is it like no man's land and you can do what you want?
As far as I know, the only rules apply to the actual manufacturers and people who retail these articles. For anything that's going to be reused or put onto another user, I don't think any of that would apply. And I don't know of anything that's coming out regarding that either.
Yeah, I
Okay.
haven't seen anything. And in fact, most of the laws, in addition to saying specifically that they apply to new garments, they specifically would exempt secondhand items. I think that's something that we see a lot with mattresses too, that anything pertaining to those, that's where we really see them even spelling out how many years back it would apply to.
Okay. So tip for our attendees is buyer beware if you buy off the secondary market. I certainly turn t-shirts into quilts, so it's a good note for me to keep that in mind. A second one I had for you is certainly we have a lot of educators who work with consumers that teach kids how to use textiles. I'm curious about the conversation on microplastics, because I've heard certain types of fabric are really they slough a lot. Like when you wash them in the washing machine, they do produce a lot of microplastics. And so are there certain types of materials that our members should be aware of that maybe, warn consumers if they're trying not to create more microplastics, kind of avoid certain textiles?
Right. If it's advertised as containing microfibers, then that right away should be a red flag for consumers.
Okay.
I also kind of on a tangential aspect, I've heard mixed reviews about this, but there are mechanisms that you can attach to your washing machine that supposedly filter out microparticles from your laundry.
Wow.
I have heard that they work very well. I've also heard that they don't make much of a difference at all. So
Yeah.
I'm not really sure
I
which
think,
is true.
yeah, California actually, I think it was California introduced a bill in the last legislative session, even that they wanted to require any new washing machines to have those systems in place, but the bill was vetoed, I believe.
Oh,
But
okay, okay.
yes, yeah.
So that's an interesting one for our members, maybe something to look into, potential research study. How do we encourage consumers to use that type of filter? And maybe with our last couple of minutes, a final question for you. So a lot of us, we're cost conscious. Maybe we live in low income areas. We're looking for a deal. There are a lot of great deals online where you can get things that normally, if you go to the store, are going to be pretty expensive, but you can buy them online. And if you're willing to wait the month for them to ship in, they're super cheap. Are those still meeting US regulations? Like if we look at the US regulations, can we consider those still safe? Do they go through a regulator when they come through ports, or what is the status of those types of products?
They are supposed to be. They are supposed to be. Um, yeah, I don't know, Beth, if you have anything to shed more light on that. I mean, they're required to, but I could understand the concern.
Right. Yeah. I kind of doubt that everything that is brought into ports or US ports is looked at and to that amount of detail. But yeah, echoing what Kim said, they're supposed to be.
So
Okay.
something that would be helpful to educate consumers or students on would be maybe to look at recalls. For example, in the United States, there's a Consumer Product Safety Commission, and then elsewhere in the world that publish recalls or even warnings to certain manufacturers, or they do extra testing, and they have awareness campaigns going on. So without calling out specific manufacturers or stores or anything like that, that would be a good way to educate yourself. And personally, I always wash everything first. So that's
Good
something to,
idea.
yeah.
And don't
Good
worry,
suggestion.
attendees, we are going to reach out to the CPSC and FTC to see if they will join us for a webinar to educate us on their different programs. We are going to post a copy of the PowerPoint presentation so you can go through. Those slides are really interesting. They have some great details for all of you. So look for that to be posted. And I think we're going to put it on the chat, but we'll also put it available for the rewatching of the video. And then there is professional development units for today's session. And so you can receive a certificate with your PDUs that you can apply towards your WAFCS certifications. And then finally, we would love to hear your feedback. This is a new webinar series. We're reaching out to industry to help us educate our members on these various product related changes that will affect them, hoping that you will share this with the different individuals and families that you work with in communities so that they're aware of these upcoming changes. So please feel free to click the link to let us know what you think and if there's specific topics you'd like us to cover in the future. And again, Kim, Beth, I found that just riveting. I thought it was great. I hope that everyone will take a look at the slides later. And if we do receive any questions after the session, I'll certainly reach out to connect you with those individuals.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending today.
Bye-bye.
Take care.